Welcome back to another in our series of great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today comes from the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 1, the report of Jerusalem. The words of Nehemiah the son of Hacaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me, and keep my commandments, and do them, though your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them, and bring them to the place that I have chosen, to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now I was cupbearer to the king. We do like to imagine how situations would turn out under different circumstances. Studies have been conducted when groups of people are gathered and given scenarios in which difficult choices have to be made in order to survive. You know the ones. 7 people are aboard a ship on the ocean when the engines fail and there's only enough rations for 5. Which 2 do you put out on a lifeboat to fend for themselves on the ocean? Then you proceed to give a short description of the people on board, and you must choose based on qualifications. Always a fun party game. It seems that we have our own reasons as to which traits are most valuable. We are sometimes tripped up by such scenarios when we are pressed to think upon what characteristics are really valuable in life and death situations. My biggest decision today is, how many cups of coffee should I have this morning? After all, I don't want to be up half the night tossing and turning. That's what's called the first world problem. That may have been the life of Nehemiah. Do I serve dry wine to King Artaxerxes or something else? Is he having fish or is he having beef? Well, actually, he did have to drink it first to see if it was poisoned. But we'll leave that part out for now. But that was the extent of a cupbearer to the king. It may be an overstatement, but Nehemiah must have been good at what he did in order to have obtained such a prestigious position. I rather doubt he needed to take a civil servant's exam or been required to have at least a bachelor's degree to apply. Then along comes his brother. So that's the Hebrew word, Ach means. Whether an actual blood relative or simply a fellow Jew is a matter of some debate. But at the very least, one of the nation comes from a trip to Judea, and in particular Jerusalem, and tells of the terrible state of affairs of the people and the city. The date often attributed to this book, which was originally called the second book of Ezra until it was changed to Nehemiah, the date of the book is around 445 BC, and Jerusalem was sacked and burned in 586 BC. Simple math shows that about 140 years have gone by from Jerusalem's destruction and Nehemiah's learning of the condition here in the first chapter. Obviously, no one living is still alive who was there at the destruction. so it is only second and third-hand stories that they have heard. Yet it is enough to strike a note of sorrow in the hearts of those who heard of its continued sorry state. At this precise moment in the history of nearly all turning points in history is where a dividing line is drawn. The line isn't often drawn according to education or knowledge or degrees earned or letters that follow names describing such. It isn't necessarily drawn according to physical attributes or beauty or even dexterity. But it is often drawn, and people fall on one side of that line or the other because they are moved to actually do something, more than exclaim, "Well, that's too bad." It is the person who declares, "I may not be able to do much, but I can do something." They stand in stark contrast to the one who cries, "What can I do? I'm just one person." So it is with this man who has never overseen a building project, to our knowledge, this man who has never led an army, to our knowledge, this man whose first reaction was most certainly to weep and mourn. Yet we find that accompanying this natural reaction, he unleashes something with the greatest force and most potential for success. Yes, Nehemiah fasts and prays. Not for a moment, not for a minute, not for a day or a week or even just a month, but until he gets an answer. Nehemiah 1:11, "O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man." Now I was a cupbearer to the king. Wait, what? Nehemiah, what are you proposing? Are you actually suggesting to the God of heaven that you, a cupbearer, are going to bring a plan before the most powerful king of his day? That's ludicrous. That's outrageous. That's so preposterous, it just might work. I like to point out to people that this wasn't a flash-in-the-pan idea, so to speak. It wasn't a knee-jerk response. Nehemiah has been praying for 3 to 4 months. When was the last time you prayed for 3 or 4 months about a project? Now, the opportunity to speak comes in the second chapter. Let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. What are we to glean from those 7 verses that end chapter 1? There are certain words that almost seem to jump off the page when I read that prayer. Nehemiah begins with the recognition of who is listening to him. Not just the Lord God of heaven, not just the great and awesome God, but the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. And then let your ears be attentive and your eyes open. Okay, got it. Nehemiah wants the attention of God. Well, I think he has it, for he has been praying this prayer day and night for months. Look at the date stamp, chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 2, verse 1. He's not praying just for himself, but for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Did you catch the "we" part? He doesn't try to escape and lay the blame at those of the past, but even says, "Even I and my father's house have sinned." Now for the clincher. Nehemiah asks God to remember. Remember the warning given to Moses and also the promise that if, and there's that word, if they return and keep his commandments, that he would gather them and bring them back. In reality, it is now Nehemiah who remembers that promise. God is not like man who forgets. God had not forgotten. His long-suffering waited patiently for someone to remember that promise. And now at last, someone does. God wasn't waiting for someone with a degree in construction management to build a wall. He wasn't waiting for one with a master's degree in human resources or someone with a PhD in psychology. He was waiting for someone who was ready and willing to return. lo and behold, in the true form of God, he equips the willing. The same God who entrusted shepherds and sojourners and young boys and girls and keepers of sycamore trees to his plan now calls a cupbearer to lead the charge. Do you suppose that if a person were to somehow remind God with words like, "Oh God, remember that you promised if anyone asked for wisdom that you would give it without reproach"? Or how about, "Lord God Almighty, remember when you told us to pray for our leaders that we might lead a peaceful life"? Or remember when you said that if we had faith and did not doubt that we could cast mountains into the sea? I wonder if God is just waiting for us to ask these and so many more that he has promised. He's promised that he would answer to people of faith. Maybe I need to spend a few weeks in fervent prayer before I make such a request. It's certainly about time for our world's sake. Wouldn't you agree? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters of the Bible.